All right, this is One Last Midnight. Welcome back to another lesson in programming in C#, a beginning course. Now, if you haven't already, go back and review some of the previous lessons. Our last lessons, we learned about variables. Now, in the last lesson, I gave you a challenge, and that was to extend our little application and see if you could do something cool with it by, I don't know, maybe changing the text color or looking at the different methods in the console namespace and seeing if you could come up with something different. Let me run the application for you and show you what I did to the trivia game to make it kind of unique. So as we start up, you're going to see the window expand. You're going to see my logo. I've got One Last Midnight Presents. Press any key to continue. I clear the screen after that point, and I put up the title of the game, which is Trivia Master Harry Potter Edition, with the copyright underneath it and the description. And then press the key to continue again, which clears it again and gets ready for the next step, which is actually going in and developing the game. So let me show you what I did with that. I just, I made some minor changes. So I wound up putting in some ASCII art. I put in a couple new variables to handle the subtitle, to handle presents, and what else? That was mainly about it. The ASCII art, I went to a website that you can do a Google search on ASCII art and convert, and you'll wind up finding a bunch of websites that help you convert to either an image or text to ASCII art. And wound up putting those in place. Now, the only difference with creating this variable and other variables, string variables, is that I want to putting the @ symbol, which allows me to put a block of text in there like this ASCII art without having to do a concatenation character and ending the string on the end of one line. The other things that I did was I changed the window size. I increased the size of the window, the height and the width, to make it so that it's a little bit bigger. And then I wound up changing some colors, right? So I printed out my logo with cyan and the author in dark blue, dark cyan. And then the rest is just kind of the same. The only thing different here that you haven't seen is the clear. And that just allows you to clear the console screen so that you could start from a blank console screen. Now we have a lot to cover in this lesson, so why don't we get to it? We're going to look at understanding expressions, so you know what an expression is and how to be able to identify one. We're going to look at understanding statements. What is a statement and how to be able to identify that. Region and end region directive, which will allow you, you saw it just a moment ago where I was able to collapse some code. Console read and console write line, we'll look at those a little bit. We'll look at the if statement, we'll look at the else statement, we'll look at the else if statement. And we'll look at the switch and case statements. And then we'll do a recap and we'll have another challenge so you guys can practice and get familiar with coding. Okay, so what is an expression? Well, an expression is constructed from an operand and operators. What is that, right? What's an operand? It's an operand, it's a term that's used to describe an object that is capable of being manipulated. Now that's still not really a clear understanding of what it is. So here, let's look at an operator, and it's a character that represents an action, right? And so if you look at it from math perspective, the 3 + 4 is the whole expression. And where you have your operand of 3 and your operand of 4, and your operator is the plus symbol in the middle. From a coding perspective, it's very similar. So X and Y could be variable names. So those are operands, and the operator is in the middle. So I hope you guys understand that, because we're going to be dealing with expressions a lot. Okay, so let's look at a quick example in code. I want to comment this section out right here so that we can run our example without any kind of interference. So let's do this. Let's see, in expression, we'll call it int expression 1, and we'll make that equal to 3 + 4. Which of course is going to be 7, right? And we'll do it in expression 2, and we'll make that equal to 1 + 2. And then finally we'll do in expression 3, and we're going to make that equal to expression 1 plus expression 2. And then finally what we want to do is we want to just do a console write. I would do a write line, console write line. And we're going to write out expression 3. All right, so here is an example of an expression. And we happen to be stuffing this into a variable. Another example of an expression. Again, we're stuffing it into a variable name. And then lastly, just so you can get an understanding of what's going on here, these are two variable names, but that is also an expression. So expressions can be either with literal operands or they can be as part of variables. or objects, or, you know, whatever is going to fit into this expression. It's not always going to be a number. It's not always going to be a string. It could be other things. It could be part of an object. It could be part of some sort of collection, or whatever the case might be. All right, so what is a statement? Well, a statement is an action that a program executes. And we've already written statements before. You just didn't know they were called statements. And there's various types of statements. There's declaration statements. There are expression statements, conditional, looping, jump statements, etc. There's a ton of them. Okay, so these are statements, right? This is actually, it's a variable declaration statement. Right, so this statement here, actually these three are variable declaration statements. We've already done them before. They're up here, right? This is what we did with our title and our description and all that. Those were variable declaration statements. Now, if I was to say expression equals 30, this is an example of expression statement, but it's an of assignment because we're assigning this value to this expression. And finally, if we were to look at the console write line is an expression statement. It's a statement of method invocation. So write line is a method inside of console. So that's what this is. So again, here's an example of different types of statements inside of an application. Okay, let's move on to logic. This is our beginning statement in logic, and we're going to look at the if statement. Now, it's sometimes called a conditional statement. It's sometimes called a selection statement. So the if statement tells a program which statement or statements to run. You know, that area that's being run is sometimes known as the then statement. It's based on a value of a Boolean expression. So you're evaluating an expression, and the Boolean value, true or false, is going to allow it to do something. The if statement. It's going to tell the code in the if statement to do something. So if I was to look at the if statement and break it down for you, this is what it would look like in C#, where you're writing if, and then you're evaluating some sort of expression, right? Is player ready? That's a Boolean. Let's pretend that it's a Boolean. And if it's equal to true, then I'm going to run the then statement. All right, I'm going to comment out these lines that we just did. And commenting out is up here on the top. I'm sorry I didn't show you before. But you can comment out with the keyboard if you want to, or you can hit this little button. You select your code that you want to comment out, and you hit that button. If you want it to uncomment out that particular block of code, you just select it and hit the uncomment, and it'll take it out. Commenting out code means it's not going to be executed. So that you can either remove it from your application, or you can leave yourself little messages like this is going to be the end of the program right here. So if you guys think I look different from a second ago, it's because I just got a haircut and I've continued to record. Let's look at the if statement. So the if statement, we're just going to deal with something completely new. It's easier to evaluate the if statement by doing this following block of code. So let's spin up a Boolean, call it condition. Let's initialize it to true. And then we're going to say if paren condition, and we're going to put a bracket. Now remember, code runs in between brackets, so you have to put a bracket there. The reason why we didn't put an equal to anything is because this by default means it equals true. You don't have to put equals true. This is equals true. And let's go ahead and write console.writeLine paren condition is true. All right, so if we were to run this code, as a matter of fact, let's run this code. If we run this code right now, what's going to happen is we're going to get a console write line, and it's going to print condition is true, because we have set condition to equal true. And when I hit the if statement, there it is, condition is true. When we hit the if statement, it said, if this condition is equal to true, write out this line of code. Piece of cake, right? So that is the if statement in a nutshell. It's very, very simple, but let's expand upon it. Let's go ahead and look at the else statement, which is part of the if statement if you want it to be. You don't have to have it, but it's added to the end of the if statement. And it actually becomes active when the if statement expression fails. So if we're testing for a condition equals true, the fail position would be false. And the statements that execute when you hit the failure condition of the if statement. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. So here is the if statement, if player ready equals true. And if this is a true statement, it would then execute the then statement. Now, if this happens to be false, is player ready is equal to false, not true, then it would actually go into this else block of code and it would execute the else statement. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, we're back at the block of code that we wrote just a minute ago. And now I want to put in a failure condition for this. And we're going to put in else. And remember, you have to put in brackets because code typically runs between a pair of brackets. And what we want to say is console.writeLine condition is false. So what would happen is if we run this code and condition is still true, it would once again execute the then statement. Well, let's change it to false. So now we get to this line of code and the IDE evaluates it and says, hey, this is no longer true. It's actually false. So it's actually going to run this block of code. And you can see that when you run the application. So as soon as we run the application, you'll see condition is equal to false. So there's still more that you can do in the if statement. So let's expand upon this idea. Let's look at the final piece of the if statement, which is the else if statement. Now the else if statement is used instead of else. It's actually, that's not 100% true. It is used instead of else, but you can also have else there as well. And I'll show you that. It allows for testing of multiple conditions. And the else if statement becomes active when the if statement expression evaluation fails. And it executes when the evaluation is successful. So that might be a little confusing, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. Let's get rid of this block of code. Instead, I want to write something like this, where I'm going to have a write line and I'm going to have coffee sizes. And size 1 is for small, 2 for medium, 3 for large. And then I'm asking a user to input their selection. And I'm storing that value into a string. Now I want to test these values. I'm going to have one of 3 values. So what I want to do is I want to be able to test multiple conditions. So I said if string, which is going to be our coffee size, is equal to 1, then what I want to do is I want to say, how about you ordered a small coffee? Now, else if string is equal to 2, bracket, I want to write, you ordered a medium coffee. And let's test for the third condition. Else if string is equal to 3, bracket, you ordered a large coffee. Now, what happens if they don't enter 1, 2, or 3? Well, we can have a failover and we could just say else, please select correct size. So in the case of this block of code, what we're doing is we're asking for a user's input. We're going to write this line. Here's your coffee sizes. Please enter your selection. Then we're going to ask for a selection and we're looking for 1, 2, or 3. If we get any other value other than a 1, 2, or 3, it's going to fail into please select correct size. And then, but if you get a 1, it's going to small coffee, 2 is medium, and 3 is large. So let's go ahead and test it out. All right, we'll run our application. Here's our selection. Let's say I want to order a medium coffee. And there it is. I ordered a medium coffee. Now, since we don't have a loop, there's nothing else we can do here. We're actually at the end of the program statement, but let's run it again. And let me just put in some garbage in here. And so if I put in some garbage, it says, please select correct size. Now, ultimately, you would want this in some sort of loop where they're answering 1, 2, or 3. So you get the answer that you're looking for before the program proceeds on, but we'll deal with that later. Let's look at switch and case statements. So switch and case statements allow variables to be tested for equality against a list of values. So you have a list of values, and if it equals a value, then, you know, it winds up working. In most instances, you can replace your if-else statements with a switch statement. And the code for a switch statement executes on equality. So if what you're testing for is equal to what the value currently is, then that block of code will run. Let's go ahead and look at this in the IDE. Let's keep working with this example because this is a perfect example of switching out an if-else if statement for a switch statement. Let's keep these first 3 lines of code. I'm just going to copy them. And then what I want to do is get rid of the rest of this and just comment it out. And we'll paste those lines of code that we just copied right here. So same condition. We're asking what size of coffee do you want? We're waiting for the user to input 1, 2, or 3. Let's write a switch statement to handle this block of code. You would type switch, paren, string, because this is the expression that we're testing against, bracket. Now there needs to be a default value. Switch has to have a default value. So you have to type in default, and it's a little bit different. You put in a colon here. This is the condition that you're testing for, our default condition. This would be equivalent to this final else condition right here. And there's also something else that's different with the switch statement, is that you need to put in break to stop the line of code. This is not apparent right now, but it will become apparent here in a second. So let's implement in the else, the final else statement. And let's take that block of code that we have here, and under default, let's paste this in. So if the string is any value other than 1, 2, or 3, by default, it's going to print this, please select correct size. Let's handle the other conditions. The way you test for a value in a switch statement is by putting the keyword case, and then the value that you're expecting. In this instance, it would be 1, and then also followed by a colon and a break. Now, the statement that's going to get executed is always going to be before the break, and this one would be a small coffee. Just going to copy this line from the if-else statement. We can copy this quite easily, and we're going to put in 2 more. 1 for the condition of 2 and 1 for the condition of 3. Let's change those values. And let's put this as a medium coffee and a large coffee. So here is what the code is telling the program. It's almost identical to the if-else statement that we just wrote up here. So when a user inputs their selection, right here we're going to say the switch statement is going to evaluate the value that is in string. And if it happens to be a 1, it's going to execute this line of code, and then it's going to break. And why break is important is because you want to leave the next case. You don't want to evaluate case 2, case 3, or default. You want to jump out of this block of code. That's what break allows you to do. Break will actually go to this next following line right down here, and it'll skip everything else because it met the condition, it executed the line of code, and then it's like, I'm out of here. I don't want to do any more. So in the case of 1, you're going to print out you ordered a small coffee, 2 is a medium coffee, 3 is a large coffee. If it's any other value other than 1, 2, or 3, please select correct size. Let's go ahead and test it. We get our question, what size coffee do we want? I put in the value of 1, it prints out you ordered a small coffee. If I hit return again, it's going to exit because once again, this is not in a loop. It goes to the following line of code, which is to exit the program. This is just looking for an input and there's no other code beyond this, so it just exits out of the program. Again, if I execute this application and I put in garbage, it winds up saying, please select correct size. Ultimately, again, just like the if statement condition up here that we had, you would want to put this in a loop to make sure that it meets the value that you're looking for. But we'll deal with that when we deal with loops. Now let's quickly talk about the region and region directive. And it's pretty simple. Really all it does is it allows you to specify a block of code that you can expand or collapse. And this is really helpful when you're trying to organize large code files where you've got thousands of lines of code. It begins with pound region and you can give it a name. And then the directive ends with pound end region. And let's go ahead and take a look at it. It's a very simple concept. In the beginning of this lesson, I wound up commenting out this block of code on the top here, which prints out my logo and my title and the name of the game and so on and so forth. And the reason why I did that is because it's very, very long, as you can see. I wound up putting that block of code into a region so I can easily hide it. And you can see here's the directive region, and I gave it a name, which was, this was produced in the variables lesson. And at the very end of all of this, I ended that region with an end region. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to collapse that block of code into a nice little small area to hide it and keep it out of the way for better organization. And that's all there is to the region and region directive. All right, let's do a recap on this lesson. So we learned about expressions. What are they? What is an expression? We learned about statements. What do statements do? We also took some time. We learned about the if statement. The if statement evaluates on what type of data. Do you remember? Also, how many parts are there to an if statement? We also took some time and learned about the switch statement. And switch statements execute other code statements on what? Finally, we learned about region and end region and what is it used for? All right, now on to the challenge. So the challenge for this lesson is see if you can recreate my intro screens, something similar to what I did on my intro screens. Show some sort of logo or ASCII art and then turn around, clear the screen, go to the next screen, show the title of the application, the description and stuff, and then clear the screen and get ready for user input. And then also try to start with some basic input, like asking for the player name and storing that into a variable. And also, since we're doing something about Harry Potter, ask for the player's house. See if you can't store that data into some variables, and we'll try to use it for the next lesson. So thank you guys for joining me on this lesson on conditional statements or select statements. If you liked the video, hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. And if you want to follow me on any of my social media, you can find the links in the description below. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I go live and when I post new videos. Talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.